Thank you all so much for coming. Today is a celebration of Kurt Tweraser. Few things come to mind when I think of my dad. Moral compass, life of the party, hard worker, probably the leading scholar of the steel industry in Linz, Austria. In any case, a couple of procedural things. Come on in. Welcome to everybody who is joining us here at Butterfield Trail Village. Welcome to everybody who is joining us via Zoom. Kudos to our dear cousin, Richard Cohen, who is manning the tech today. Awesome. And a couple of notes of thanks before we begin today's program. First of all, it's going to be fairly informal. Our target for length of speech is going to be, or length of remembrance or story recollection, is 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Plan accordingly. Plan accordingly. Wanted to thank the staff here at Butterfield Trail Village. Those of you who know Kurt know that for the last year, since his diagnosis, he was in the healthcare unit here at Butterfield Trail, and the care he got was amazing, loving, and it really spurred him on. And I think we got some bonus weeks, months, maybe even a year because of that wonderful care that he got from nurses like Chelsea. Chelsea was his favorite. Laura and the whole staff and the physical therapy staff. Dad was working, reading, writing pretty much up until the end. It's amazing in and of itself. Another item of procedure is that after we conclude here, there will be a little period, a pause, if you will, and we're going to reconvene over in the lodge right across the street from the main house here at Butterfield Trail at 4:30. It's going to be a little bit of time where we need to set some things up over there, but you're welcome to go over there at any time. Just there will be a little bit of coming and going, and we'll be setting up an amazing slideshow that was put together by my dear Uncle Graham, who's sitting over here, and my dear Aunt Karen, who's sitting right over there. And the phrase "a man in full" is appropriate for the slideshow that you will see, because you'll see him in all iterations of Kurt, from the youngest through, heavier beer drinking phases, to marathon running phases, to fast walking phases, and all gradations in between. Wanted to begin today with the person who has known Kurt longest and the best, and probably the only one on God's green earth who can read his handwriting. Gene Tweraser. Probably the only one on God's green earth who can read his handwriting. Gene Tweraser.
I think it's traditional to read the obituary, and so that's what I'm going to do. Felix and Ben and I had a lot of fun writing this, and we knew Kurt would not approve because they charge by the word, and he wouldn't have wanted us to spend that much money. And we said, "You can't stop us." We did take out 4 words. Okay, Kurt Tweraser passed away peacefully on October 1, 2023 in Fayetteville, Arkansas. He was born on March 30th, 1930 in Schornstein, Austria, to Hans Hutterer and Hermine Braunasberger. He's survived by his wife of 63 years, Jean Tweraser, his sons Felix and Ben Tweraser, his daughters-in-law, Julie Johnson and Robyn Scott. I don't know why they didn't want to use that last name. Tweraser. Can't even spell it. And his grandchildren, Isabel Tweraser, Shannon Tweraser, and Adam Tweraser. They didn't have a choice. He was preceded in death by his parents and his adoptive father, Franz Tweraser. A self-proclaimed hillbilly from the Alps, Kurt spent his early years in a small mountain village before moving to Wels, a larger town. His scholastic talent made him a sought-after tutor and kept the bullies at bay. When the war came to Austria in 1944, Kurt struck a deal to avoid Nazi indoctrination by joining the fire brigade. There were plenty of fires. In early 1945, Kurt was drafted into the Volkssturm, People's Army, and where he was issued a bazooka and a bicycle, and sent off to fight General Patton's Third Army. Before it came to that, a senior officer sent them home to their mothers. When the Americans occupied his area after the war, Kurt enjoyed a brief career as a black marketeer, trading schnapps for American cigarettes, which could be used to purchase food items for his family and other things that I won't go into. The GIs tried to teach him baseball with little success, but this led to a lifelong interest in the American pastime and a love-hate relationship with the St. Louis Cardinals. Kurt trained as a bookkeeper, completing his studies at the Handelsakademie in Linz and holding various accounting jobs there and in Vienna. In 1958, he was ready for a life change. He invented a reverse Marshall Plan, whereby he would be imported into the United States. Kurt met a young American student in their local Viennese cafe, and thus began a whirlwind courtship that ended in an engagement, 2 years of letter writing when Jean returned to the US, writing that he touted as the best he ever produced, and marriage in 1960. He immigrated to the United States in 1962 and started graduate school at American University School of International Service, where he earned a PhD. He taught at the University of Arkansas in the Department of Political Science from 1967 until 1992, when he took early retirement to begin an additional career as a historian of Upper Austria and the city of Linz, which resulted in numerous influential publications. For this work, he was awarded the Distinguished Scholarly Medal by the city of Linz in 2001. Kurt won the inaugural Haggai Marathon in 1977 and enjoyed running, long-distance walking, bird watching, reading, watching soccer, listening to classical music, and cooking. He loved the company of his grandchildren and extended family. His favorite place in the world was Balsam Bay on Lake Clear in the Adirondacks, where every summer he could enjoy these activities and the people he loved.
Thanks, Mom. I have a few stories in my back pocket, just in case there's a lull in the proceedings today, but I wanted to relate two stories that have become part of family lore and maybe reach a little bit beyond the family. The first story connects with Dad's lifelong interest in the American pastime and the love-hate relationship with the St. Louis Cardinals. Our favorite player as a family was Bob Gibson. We adored the St. Louis Cardinals, particularly the 19 Cardinals championship Cardinals in the 1960s, 1964, 1967. Won the pennant in 68, probably should have won in 1968. Our favorite player was Bob Gibson, great competitor, Hall of Fame pitcher, wonderful man, ran a successful steakhouse in Omaha, Nebraska on retirement. The Cardinals and Gibson were struggling in the 1970s. The championship caliber team was on the wane. Gibson was soldiering on towards ultimate retirement in 1975. In 1974, I looked this up. I had to go to the historical box scores. August of 1974, Gibson and the mediocre team around him was playing the San Diego Padres, late night game. Gibson threw a wonderful game. Cardinals had 15 hits, left just about every person on base, lost 3-1. Gibson pitched a complete game, and Dad said, "Genug, enough." So most of the Cardinal games to that point were listened to in the Tweraser household on a shortwave radio, beautiful shortwave radio, encased in blue and white plastic.
It had been a
Wedding present, yes. Thank you. Wedding present. You could pick up signals from all over the world. It's great radio. So he calmly picked up the radio, took it out on a front porch, and demolished it thoroughly. Mom's response: to take a flashlight, bonk him on the head, and it was kind of a family pilgrimage. When we'd see Dad, we'd feel the bump on his head. It's a testament to 63 years of marriage that they endured that particular episode. Many years later, when the house was on the market, 74, so 30 some odd years later, when the house is on the market, you could go to the front porch and find something like this shard of, make sure it's in the frame, a shard of blue plastic. The ones 30 years later were quite a bit smaller, but so this stays in an important place in our household. It has a special basket devoted to it. So the radio story. Second story, I got an important footnote to this story last night, just by happy coincidence, at a party with the person who conveyed the story in the first place, Kathleen Condrey, a distinguished faculty member here at the University of Arkansas, who was in a political science class that Dad was teaching. And those of you who know Kurt know that his relationship with technology was, how shall we put it, fraught. And here's where the stories diverge, my version and Kathleen's version. But I'm going to stick with my version. I like it better, even though she was there. She was the eyewitness. She's the source of the story. Okay. In my version, there's an overhead projector. Those of you who remember classrooms from the 1970s, remember the overhead projector. You would painstakingly prepare your transparency. It would be illuminated on the wall or a screen behind you. On that particular day, the overhead projector refused to work. No bulb, no illumination. So once again, Kurt calmly picks up an eraser. It's about 10 feet from the blackboard, hurls the eraser with great force against the blackboard, and cries out, "Nothing works!" Nothing works. It's the wonderful footnote I got to this last night from Kathleen, is that when that happened in the classroom, she didn't do this, but another student in the class transcribed nothing verse phonetically, and it was passed among the students, and it became kind of a motto that perhaps has sustained them through the ups and downs of life. Nothing verse. The overhead projector. According to Kathleen, it was just a dry erase marker that didn't work that he threw against them. But I'm going to stick with my fanciful version of the story. Kurt was an only child. When he came to the University of Arkansas, along with many others in 1966, 1967, great influx of faculty members in many fields, including the humanities, go humanities. Among Dad's earliest acquaintances and great friends was a trio of distinguished historians at the University of Arkansas. These four, David Sloan, David Edwards, Tom Kennedy, became kind of this, I don't want to say band of brothers, but I don't know if you would go that far, but kind of a brotherhood. And these gentlemen adopted Kurt into the fraternity of historians. And this didn't really reach full flower until after retirement. Kurt was in the Department of Political Science, but upon retirement, he, as David put it once, started living his life in reverse and became this outpouring of scholarly work on not just the steel mills in Linz, Austria, but in general, the American occupation of the part of Austria where he grew up, Upper Austria. And so without further ado, I wanted to call two of the three members of this brotherhood to the podium, and we'll figure something out for the other member of this brotherhood, but I think we have something up our sleeve that Mom will help us out with. So wanted to introduce David Sloan, distinguished historian emeritus from the University of Arkansas. David.
I just learned about the 3-minute rule, but I'll see if I can stick with that. Maybe I'll just lop off the end. I decided as I was thinking about that, about moments when Kurt, who had always been a friend, became a kind of more multifaceted, richer person. And I thought of one particular moment that occurred in Hot Springs, Arkansas. But that made me think of another moment that occurred in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and I'll start with that one, just a little one. Second one was big, but this was just a little one. We used to go down to the races in Hot Springs, and we used to find places that, how shall I put it, not too expensive, and that caused a number of things at various times. But this particular time, there was a big rainstorm, and Kurt and Jean were in. This wasn't a real low eyeball motel, I don't think. At least it wasn't supposed to be. Okay, it was a little low eyeball. And in the morning, after this big rainstorm, or during this big rainstorm, I guess, my memory of this is a little garbled, but then we had a number of drinks in this low eyeball place the night before, and Jean came and said it's leaking in the room, and so we went over, and of course Jean had come out and gone back in again. We went over there, and here's the bed, and then but here is Kurt still in place. He was in the bed, and when we got in there, he said, "It is raining on my chest." I thought, well, this is different. You know, 'cause I'd thought of Kurt as a fun guy to be around, but not really all that talkative, quiet mostly. And yet here he was staging a kind of nothing works moment. He was in the bed and he wanted it to happen right there. And I thought, gee, this is a theatrical Kurt. This is a different Kurt than I'd ever known. The second one, and this was more important to me, and it happened in Hot Springs as well. I'm making Kurt sound like a bookie, but and I'm not even sure the second one was in Hot Springs, but I think it was. Kurt had been invited down to an annual meeting of historians in Hot Springs, and to give the banquet lecture. Well, it occurred to me as I was driving down there that even though I'd known Kurt by that time a number of years, I'd never heard him speak. I'd never heard him lecture in what he did for a living. And so I thought, well, this is going to be interesting because I also knew that he was going to be speaking to an audience of people who didn't know him. And it was going to be on a Saturday morning, and that was when the banquet was. And so that meant it was going to be an audience of people who wanted out. They're going to drive to Fayetteville or wherever. And I thought, this could be difficult. But he was introduced, and he stood up. The topic was something like eyewitness to history, that kind of thing. And so of course the talk could have been just a number of anecdotes of what it was like to be growing up as a kind of early teenager in a society that was literally collapsing around him, and he could have gone with nothing but anecdotes that were sure to be crowd pleasers. I mean, you're issued a bazooka and a bicycle, and then you're given orders to go somewhere, and you ignore the orders, lose the bazooka, keep the bicycle, and then some of them were like that. They were wonderful stories. But what really impressed me about that is the way in which he interspersed among those anecdotes his very rich knowledge through an overview of what the larger situation was. And he was drawing upon, of course, his own research. He was drawing upon the research of his colleague Anita Bukey. He was drawing upon the scholarly research of a lot of people and weaving it in just beautifully. And I looked around the room as this was going on, and I thought to myself, my God, Kurt's killing them. He really had the audience in the palm of his hand, so to speak. And he, at the end of the lecture, he got a huge round of applause. And I thought, no, there's a part of Kurt that I should have been much more aware of for many years and wasn't. But then the latest one, and I'm probably over my time, but can I go one more minute? But the latest one was just a few weeks before his death, and I'd gone over to the hospice room here at Butterfield, and it was a lovely day, and Jean and Kurt and I went out to a patio place and had, I don't know, a cup of tea or something, and And the two of them, Kurt and Jean, began talking about Kurt's childhood. Now, I'd heard a lot about the lose the bazooka, keep the bicycle childhood part, but I didn't know anything about his early childhood. His early childhood, and I'm not going to go into it now, but his early childhood was a horror show in many ways. And it was that because of the society that he was born into. And a great deal of it involved what I suppose well-meaning adults thought a class system, a social system seemed to require. And this was all coming out in then this was toward the end of our friendship. And I had known him all those years and knew nothing about this. And it still strikes me as if I still wouldn't have known anything about it if we hadn't gone outside on that lovely day. And I thought, gee, what a life to go through, and what a childhood to go through, and how did he ever recover from that? And of course, one of the ways he recovered from that is marrying this wonderful woman and spending his life with her, and having these two swell boys, and I hope having friends. Thanks.
Thank you so much, David. That was beautiful. I'd like to call to the podium now, Dr. David Epperts. You may not remember this, but when I was a senior in high school, I took your class in Western Civ. Yeah, amazing teacher. You're too kind. Yeah.
There's always a danger following David Sloan to the podium, I tell you that. That's why I always had a class at 8:30 in the morning, because I knew you wouldn't have a 7:30 class. I've spent the last 2 months thinking about my relationship with Kurt and trying to come up with kind of a short definition of Kurt, a description, adjective, and it's really tough to do that. And I invite all of you to think in your own mind, how would you define Kurt? It's not easy. Kurt was a very complex person, and he evolved over the years. He wasn't the same person in 1967 when I first met him as he was in 2020. He developed. But I've tried to get to the essence of what Kurt means to me, and I think you all are trying to do the same thing. And it's good for us to come together and commiserate with one another, and give our condolences to the Tweraser Cohen family and to one another. At first, I knew Kurt. David and I met him on the same year, 1967. So it's been 53 years. And for a couple of years, my relationship with Kurt was not very deep, not very meaningful. We went to parties together. We got together and had meals, went over the Graf Walls and other houses. But my real relationship with Kurt, and also we should say with Jean, started with the famous Wednesday evening potlucks. In the early 70s, Jean and Kurt invited Steve Strasberg, who had just come to Fayetteville, to join them for dinner and watch Young Churchill on PBS. Steve brought with him a brain full of knowledge, but he was lacking some other things, such as a TV or a car, or he didn't have his PhD diploma with him yet. But Gene and Kurt realized that, invited him over to watch young Churchill. After a while, Gene decided to expand this and invited Jim Chase and me to join them. So we had this core of 3 young bachelors meeting weekly at Gene and Kurt's. And then this expanded, as all of you know. I bet everyone in here has been to that table. I know that you all have, because I've seen you there. And because I was almost always there, bringing my side dish, which was a 6-pack of cheap beer. Worked very hard for that. But during that time, I got to know Jean well. I came to appreciate her intelligence and her dependability and her patience with us. I also had the opportunity to watch Ben and Felix grow up. I'm sure that they gained a ton of knowledge, although they were never at the table, very rarely at the table when we were there. But just eavesdropping on what was going on in the back dining room. Much of it was not repeatable in polite company, but there was a lot going on back there. One of the times Gene would describe this get together as something that was a sort of encore of what Gene's parents did at their house in DC, inviting people to come. And, this was a different level of folks that attended Gene's folks' table. But nonetheless, what Gene did was to create a version of what might be called an Ozark salon. We talked about all kinds of things. And it's during that time, of course, that I became friends with Kurt, got to know him a lot better. Our relationship deepened. And I began to truly appreciate Kurt. I appreciated him even more during those potlucks, both Gene and Kurt, more when they introduced me to Caroline. One evening at the potluck, I arrived and Kurt said, "Got someone I want you to meet." And it was Caroline. I said, "Whoa, wait a minute." So a year and a half after that, Kurt and Gene were our witnesses when we got married at the old courthouse, old Washington County Courthouse. I got in touch with Bill Story, Judge Bill Story, and he said, "Yeah, I can marry you. I can officiate." Said, "When can we do this, Bill?" He said, "During my lunch break. Come on down." So we went down to his lunch break at the old courthouse, and Bill says to me, "You want the long form or the short form?" I said, "Of course, let's have the long form. I mean, this is a big deal, He said, "Okay." So he gave us the long form, which took about 90 seconds at most. Went like that. The next night we had our party, and many of you, I'm glad to see, were there. We had our party at the Basin Park Hotel in Eureka Springs. And Kurt, as what amounted to best man, was to give a toast. Well, Kurt was suffering from a severe cold at that time, and but he got up and did his job, but barely. He spoke. A few people heard him. No one understood him. I mean, it was. Don't know what he said, but he was my best man. He was my best man. Now going back a little bit in time to in the BC area, that is the before Caroline period. When as Kurt and I entered our middle ages, Kurt was a little older and a lot more wise than I was, and he began to worry about his physical health. I went to the doctor hoisted up some caution flags, and Gene, of course, took the initiative and was waving them vigorously. So he decided, well, okay, I'll take better care of myself. By that time, he'd already given up his habit of cigars, palm of throwouts, or as he called them, throwaways, and bourbon, cigars and bourbon. He liked that. He didn't quite worry what the brand was on the bourbon, but he did have favorite cigars. He had given those habits up, and he became a jogger. And when Kurt decided that he was going to get into something, he really got into it. And he became not only a jogger, he became a runner, and then he became a competitive long distance runner. And as Gene said, as it was reported in the obituary, ran and won the first Hogeye Marathon. He was the best man. There's a theory held by runners, probably unprovable. Well, it is unprovable and apocryphal, that all the time that you spend running will be added on to your lifespan. For example, if you ran 1 hour every day for a year, you would add approximately 15 days to your life. So Kurt added, I don't know, months, maybe years to his life, because he was running an hour a day virtually. And even when he stopped running outside, he would spend an hour a day on the treadmill. But time catches up on all of us. And I want to close my thoughts on Kurt by looking at his last months. And I think that his last months while he was in hospice here sort of distilled or boiled down or reduced his 93 years to his essence, what he really was. And this helps me in my search to try to find out or try to understand or try to put into words who he was, what his essence was for me. Has been pointed out, David talked about this. In the mornings, he would dictate his reminiscences. Gene would write them down, go over to the apartment, type them up, bring them back, and he would review them and edit them in the afternoon. He also began the translation of one of his really thick books, translating it from German to English. And translations and memoir writing are very, very difficult things to do if you do it right. And he approached this with the same kind of intelligence and discernment that he used throughout his life. I think these are characteristics that he had throughout his life. But it also pointed out the cooperation, the marriage in all things of Gene and Kurt, that this was a collaboration, it was a cooperation. He also, while he was bedridden, couldn't walk, but exercised with barbells. There's hand barbells. I can't walk, but I can still do this. This was part of his makeup. He presided at his 93rd birthday. He was full of life and full of fun. Every time we went over to visit, he was in a great mood, great situation for him. And this points out to me that Kurt was a person that made the best of the situation. Whatever the situation was, Kurt would try very much to make the best of it. This goes back to his teenage years in Nazi-controlled Austria, his post-war activities. The economic situation was terrible. He was making ends meet. Came to the United States, graduate student in DC, then finally at the University of Arkansas in the political science department, where he was a sort of, and he would let you know this, undercompensated professor.
Weren't they all?
But in all of those situations, not only did he survive, but he thrived. Whether the situation was complicated, difficult, dangerous, or hopeless. You know, the situation was hopeless, but he made the best of it. And to me, that's the real essence of Kurt for me. I know that each of you will have your own sense of what Kurt was, but for me, he was among the best of men, and I loved him as a brother, and I'll miss him dearly. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It was wonderful. Right now, I would like to turn it over via Zoom to the better looking Tweraser brother, who is joining us from Massachusetts. Unfortunately, the scourge of our time has hit the Tweraser Scott household. They have COVID and are not traveling. But yeah, Shannon is here representing. Yeah. Sorry about that. So without further ado, Ben Tweraser will join us via Zoom.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Well,
Yep.
yeah, as Felix said, unfortunately, we couldn't be there. And, I apologize ahead of time if I have a huge coughing fit in the middle of this, but hopefully that won't happen. So, shortly after my dad passed, my brother said something that really stuck with me. And that was, we really lucked out in the dad department. So true. I could not have asked for a better dad. We referred to him as the big guy for the last several decades. To me, he was always the big guy. From when I was a little kid until I was a grown man, I always looked up to him. As my brother said, he was a man of integrity. And though he could come off as kind of intimidating, I think underneath that gruff exterior, he was a compassionate, gentle soul, real softy. I'll miss him tremendously. I already do. It's been a real joy watching, as we refer to him as Opa, interact with our kids over the last 20 years. Whether it was playing Barbies with Shannon, and there is photographic evidence of this, it did actually happen. playing Adam in a game of chess, those are the memories that you cherish. I should add that I never beat my dad in chess, so I had to live vicariously through Adam, who did beat Opa on several occasions over the last 10 years or so. So many of my recent memories, with Kurt are from the Adirondacks and from Balsam Bay, where we were fortunate enough to spend almost every summer with him. So a lot of great memories from those times. But kind of the things that stick out are the fabulous Austrian meals that he would prepare. And my mom always there, by his side as the dependable sous chef. Got to give her credit. She was part of that team. I'll remember the cocktail hours and the great stories. I'll remember all the long walks we had with him through those beautiful Adirondack forests. But I think most of all, I'll remember sitting at the edge of the lake, just the two of us, mostly in silence, occasionally punctuated by conversation, probably about sports or how beautiful the view was. And Robyn actually, she doesn't know what I'm going to talk about next, or she didn't. She put a little asterisk on the end of this that said, or how cold he was, which is pretty funny because it's about what I'm about to talk about now. So as I mentioned before, he was a great storyteller. And I think other people have mentioned that, and he had a lot of great material to work with, especially from his childhood. So let me set the stage for this one. It was probably 6 or 7 years ago. We were up at the Adirondacks at Balsam Bay. It was just before bedtime, and the kids and I were still in the main cabin, and Opa came in to fill up his hot water bottle, which was a nightly ritual for him up there. And I don't remember that night being a particularly cold night, but it was a necessity for him because anything lower than 80 degrees was considered Arctic by Kurt. One of my kids, I can't remember whether it was Shannon or Adam, asked, Opa, why are you always cold? So he sat down at the table with us and explained to the kids why. And as many of you know this story, and it's already been, mentioned a couple of times and in the obituary, towards the end of the war as a teenager, Kurt was given that bazooka and a bicycle and sent off to fight the war. Luckily, the platoon leader or group leader realized, the folly of these ill-equipped and barely trained teenagers taking on Patton's Third Army. So he sent them home. But at this time during the war, trying to get home was not a simple task, as he has explained to my mesmerized kids. Finding shelter was not easy. And one cold, bitter, and rainy night was spent in a bombed-out railroad station in Attnang-Puchheim, which is a town in Austria just inside the border. I think was a major industrial town and had seen heavy Allied bombing. As my dad explained that night, there were 3 boys, but only 2 blankets. And unfortunately, my dad was the smallest boy. So needless to say, he went that night without a blanket. So he ended up spending probably one of the worst nights of his life just shivering away. So at the end of my story, as my kids are trying to comprehend this, he leaned back and I swear with a little twinkle in his eye and a little wry smile, he exclaimed, I've been cold for the last 72 years. So, Dad, Opa, Kurt, I hope wherever you are, the thermostat is set to a nice, comfortable 80 degrees. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I think it is appropriate at this point to call up the other member of the Tweraser Scott clan, Shannon, who joins us from Denver. And I think you have perhaps a story or a memory to convey.
See if I'm tall enough to.
You can switch it. You can pull it down. Pull it down.
Okay, got it. What my father was saying earlier about Kurt being a gentle soul is very true. I remember my mother once describing him as jolly. fitting with the season. And that is true. All my memories with him are pretty much from the summer. We would spend it in the Adirondacks. I had my summer grandparents, Nana and Opa, that I would see. I don't remember the Barbies thing, but I have a little book in my drawer. I don't even think my parents know about this. I have a picture of my two grandfathers. And the picture is in there. Have it with me all. Have it with me. The summer memories will always be with me. Whether it be expressing playful anger at my brother for beating him at chess, joking around with my mom, teaching me the glory of hot water bottles, which I do use now. So thank you. I also share his love for 80 degrees. And I remember him being so excited the day I finished my Adirondack 46. Mom greeted me as Miss 46er. It was something I really wanted to do. And he knew that. I figured I was so determined to get it finished that summer because I wanted to share that with him. And I did. Sorry, done one of these in a while. But it does remind me of my favorite story, which I was not there to witness, but you were there, grandmother, of the crazy man running up the mountain. So he wasn't as much of a hiker as other members of the family. He was a runner. So instead of hiking up Mount Whiteface, like the rest of the family, he decided to surprise them by running up Mount Whiteface on the road you're supposed to drive on. Do we know how he got on the road?
No,
It's a mystery.
not supposed to.
But I don't know. That was just one of my favorite stories. It's not a hiking story. It's a Kurt story. And I don't know. I don't have a whole lot else to say.
Thank you, Shannon. Whiteface, 4,867 feet above sea level. It's quite the ascent. So, and it's quite the menagerie that hiked it, ran up it, drove up it, and yeah, we made it down. At this point, I would like to turn things over to a family that's been with us every step of the way, the Holmes, Cohen family. Karen and Graham are here with us today. Their sons, Rafe and Gabe, are joining us via Zoom. And I think the 3-minute rule might be dead. So I'm going to release everybody from the 3-minute rule at this. It is dead. Yes, it's quite dead. Karen, please come up.
I think I can do this. Is that okay, Richard?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Karen Cohen Holmes. I'm Jean's little sister. And someone who I hope is on the Zoom, Carol Owens Roberts, will have known Kurt as long as Jean. But in this room next to Jean, I think I'm the one who has known Kurt the longest. And when we met, I was a bratty 16-year-old going on 17. I was not thrilled that this man was going to take away my big sister who had helped to raise me and take her to a foreign country. That first summer in the Adirondacks, when Kurt was learning how to canoe, I'm supposed to have said, "This is a paddle." I don't know if I actually said that, but it's such a good story. And then they left for Austria. When they returned, they lived 2 blocks from my mother's. So I got to see a lot of the weekends home from college and summers when I was working. I got to know Kurt better and even used to sneak him cigarettes. And if you know what I became, that's pretty funny. My senior thesis was on the 20th of July plot to assassinate Hitler. At that time, there was very little written about it, and the professor whose area it was away that year. So Kurt became my thesis advisor, and he was terrific.
and I am to this day very grateful that I did graduate from college. Then I went off to study in Berlin, and Kurt's statement to me before I left was, "Don't bring anyone home. One accent in the family is enough." So I tried. I didn't bring anyone back then until several years later. In 1966, they moved here to Fayetteville, and first Lucy and I, and then Graham and I and our children became regular visitors. Balsam Bay, as you've all heard, and many of you have been there, is where the extended family gathered every summer, and where we got to cook and eat together, play silly games, have giggle fits, which Kurt called giggle figgery, and be with one another. Gabe and Rafi, when they were little, thought that Balsam Bay was where Uncle Kurt and Aunt Jean lived year-round. In 2014, Kurt and I became the odd couple as Jean recovered from her stroke. I was the driver to Health South, and many of you came there to visit her. And I was teaching my then 84-year-old brother-in-law how to use the various household appliances. It's a knowledge I believe he soon forgot. And we all know how Kurt loves machines. And he was a fantastic coach and support to Jean as she recovered. Graham and I had several memorable vacations together with Jean and Kurt in Beverly, Yorkshire, Graham's hometown, in Gundelsee, Austria, and in Florence, Italy. In Florence, we had an apartment that had 41 steps to get to from the street. And on the floor, and a marble floor into which Kurt fell out of bed and survived. I always enjoyed talking with him about World War II, politics in various countries, and just about any topic. We especially enjoyed discussing various family members and analyzing different relationships. He was very wise and witty. This past year, on several visits with Jean and Kurt, I was struck by their devotion to one another and how they adapted to the challenges of their situation. Let's see if I can get through this. They showed us all how to do this with humor and grace. And he so enriched our family, and we miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. First among uncles, Graham Holmes, hiker extraordinaire. He finished the Saturday New York Times crossword in 37 minutes. Those of you who do the crossword know that Saturday is no picnic. Graham, take it away.
This isn't on my piece of paper here, but I'd like to add to Shannon's story. I can add a detail. We were up there already, and we saw two little old people standing there, little white hat, white shorts, sort of New Yorkers probably.
On whiteface.
On the top of Whiteface, and one of them said to the other, "Did you see that man running up? He was so old." I think it wasn't that he was old, he was just worn after hiking 8 miles and several thousand feet vertically. This picks up on what Karen just said, because obviously Karen didn't follow Kurt's advice, because I'm the second accent in the family. It's an unusual situation that Karen would have ignored his advice, because as she said, he was very wise, and his advice was always sound. So perhaps in this case it was sound also, but in that case I shouldn't really be here. I don't know when or where I first hiked with Kurt. It was in the Adirondacks for sure. These mountains names may not mean a lot to you, but it may have been up Phelps with Karen, Felix, Lissa Bornstein, Jean, who brought along a barely 2-year-old Ben. We didn't get all the way to the top, but it was an amazing achievement. It might have been on Big Slide with a large group, including the Patton family, or it might have been up Ampersand with just Felix, Kurt, and me. It was a memorable hike because the last stretch is very, very steep, very muddy, and very slippery, and Kurt was hiking in a pair of dress shoes. I have no idea how he got to the top. But after that, I didn't hike with Kurt for decades. I'm assuming that he thought, well, if Graham's going to hike with my boys, I don't have to. So he didn't. But my last short hike with Kurt, it was also with Karen and Jean, and it was actually August 16th, 2018. Jean was 79, Kurt was 88, Karen and I was 75, so it was quite a geriatric crew. The destination is a lovely place. A number of years ago, someone from I think from Paul Smith's College, discovered deep in the woods a grove of white pine trees that had escaped the loggers, because basically the Adirondacks were totally stripped in the 19th century. And the forests you see now are all regrowth. It's been called the Elder Grove, and the trees are around 350 years old and large. One of them was, for a while, thought to be the tallest in the state. And it's about a 3/4 mile trip from the nearest road. It's not a proper trail. It's just a so-called herd path formed by the passage of feet. And there are obstacles, fallen trees, places you've got to squeeze. It's not an easy hike. Jean wanted to come, but in the last minute, Kurt wanted to come. And my thought and Karen's thought was, oh my God, this just can't possibly happen. But we went. And to say that at that time Kurt wasn't walking too well on the flat wouldn't be overstating the situation, and he was going to come on this herd path. But we made it. Sometimes we had to climb over down trees with us all hovering around Kurt, thinking that, oh my God, he's going to come crashing down like a tall tree, and none of us were agile enough or strong enough really to stop that happening. But we made it. And it's an absolutely magical place. These magnificent trees that predate the revolution, that have survived against all the odds. And I loved it, and I think Jean loved it too. I go there as often as I can. And I think Kurt was happy to be there. But then we had to go through the whole obstacle course on the way back. But we made it. We made it back to the car. Sadly, a couple of years ago, the tallest of those trees reached the end of its life and came crashing down after 350 years. So that magnificent tree, like Kurt, is, as my mother-in-law Lucy used to say, no longer with us. Thank you.
I'm not sure about this, but Ray for Gabe, or would you like to join us for remembrance?
Sure.
Gabe?
Hi.
You're unmuted. You can go.
Oh, wait, am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay, all right. So I was gonna say some words, but it just occurred to me that I think that this is sort of an important element of any memorial for my uncle, which is that he was really into cats. And so here's a cat. And yeah, that's all I got.
I think we have a new leader in the 3-minute rule competition.
Yeah, I don't think I can't match my brother's brevity, but I can try to come close. It's hard to describe what's so special about Uncle Kurt and my memories of him, because it was made of such small pieces. You know, we'd only see him in the summer, and he's not always a super voluble guy. So I think that my memories of him from my early childhood are him diligently taking me out every year for my birthday to play mini golf and have Sundays with me along with Aunt Jean, and him reading quietly in the corner. He had this very special chair that he liked to sit in, and him just in that chair, almost like a wonderful, loving piece of furniture himself. And I just, of course, there's all like the amazing like one-liners he would deploy. But one that for whatever reason is coming to mind is we had some Jack Russell Terrier dogs that were pretty pretty unruly, and we worked really hard at one aspect of discipline with them, which was not feeding them from the table so that they wouldn't beg. And year after year, they just continued to beg from the table, and this mystery went on for a long time until finally, I'm not sure if he copped to it or someone just saw it in the act, but we discovered that Uncle Kurt, despite having not expressed too much interaction with the dogs, to my knowledge, was just always feeding them off the table. He just thought that they were asking for it and they were cute, so he's always giving them food. Yeah, I love Uncle Kurt. I'll miss him, and I'm really happy to know him.
Thanks, Rafe. That was lovely. At this point, I would be honored to call my daughter, Isabel Tweraser, up to the podium. Okay, all right. We're calling an audible. I mean, no worries at all. Yeah. It's been wonderful, not just the last year, of course, all of our lives being able to trade stories, interact with Opa, as he is known to his grandchildren, and Isabel is here to share a remembrance.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm Isabel. I'm Kurt's granddaughter. I am this guy's daughter, and I want to keep it short and snappy because I know that's what Opa would do. So I'll take it back to our favorite place to be with him and his favorite place, the Adirondacks. I want you to picture, I'm sure many of you have been there, to one of the gorgeous dinners at Balsam Bay where we're all gathered around this giant table and so many people are talking over each other and having giggle fits and passing salt and different kinds of butter and everything. But as soon as Opa started to talk, every single time a hush came over the room, and partially because it's hard to understand him, but also because his words were important. Every time he spoke, you know, it was going to be something hilarious or profound or significant. So you knew when he opened his mouth, you listened. And that was something I knew my entire life. When Opa spoke, we listened because it was going to be important. I'll share a funny little anecdote. We've talked about his love for playing games with his grandchildren, and those are some of the most wonderful memories that I have, are playing games with him. I remember a few years ago, we were up in the Adirondacks playing a game of hearts, and we asked my Opa if he wanted to join in. He said, oh, sure. And he's a card shark and he's very smart. We know he always wins at chess. So we were like, yes, okay. And we're starting the game. He's just sloughing cards left and right. And we're like, he's a savant. He's a genius. And then it comes to light. He had no idea what he was doing. He didn't know how the game worked. He was just playing random cards, but he played it off. It was incredible. And he was just that kind of guy. We trusted him. And I just want to touch really quickly on this last year that we had with him. It was some of the most treasured moments of my life to be able to spend this time with him. And like my Nana said, it's a year that we didn't expect to have. And we were so lucky that he was sharp as a tack the entire time. He was working on his memoirs, and we got to learn about the years of his life. We got to learn about our namesake and learn the story of how we got the name Tweraser. And that is something that I realized is such a huge blessing, because there are so many people who don't know their family heritage and don't know their cultural roots. And because of his I don't know, his account of his own life and his work as a historian for his own life and his work on his own memoirs, we have been able to learn about the history of our name, the history of our family in such a beautiful way. And even though our name is hard to spell and pronounce and confuses everyone we encounter, I am so honored to share his name, and I hope that we can carry on his legacy honorably. Thank you.
Dr. Julie Johnson will join us now. We're back on schedule, I think.
Yeah, some of you made me cry, so you have to be careful who you follow. So I also want to thank everybody for your stories, because I think that you can continue to get to know someone after they're gone through storytelling. And there's even a belief in Mexico that your loved ones are never really gone as long as you remember them. And I think by that metric, Kurt will be present and alive in all of our lives, probably for generations to come, and maybe even in his students' lives. So in reflecting on what I should say about him, I realized that almost all of the stories that have punchlines or defined edges around them are things that I know secondhand. But they're also vivid, that it seems like I was there. Even my mom occasionally says, "Nothing works." And I also believe that it's been said in Denmark as well, which is where my sister has a new family. So what do I personally know that I could share? What could I share, I thought? And it's kind of personal and not at all funny. I'm a fellow traveler through the circles of hell called academia. And I've always looked up to Kurt and how he managed. When he was in hospice and became a historian of his own life, he said something about it with such matter-of-fact equanimity and grace that I was not only blown away, but I was also heartened. He's a role model for me, and really for the things that matter. So in addition to the profile of this humorous charmer that we all know and love so well, I would like to tell you that I knew Kurt as a person full of wisdom and this thing that I like to call equanimity. So wisdom often comes with age, but he must have had this quality of equanimity as a teenager when he sized up his situation and learned how to run a black market to survive wartime Austria. Where some people try to go through life in a fantasy camp, Kurt seems to have had this ability to size up just about any situation for what it really was. His equanimity and intelligence are probably what allowed him to become such a wit. It made everyone laugh all the time. He made everyone laugh all the time. And his humor was never mean or unkind. One of my favorite memories of Kurt was when I happened to be in Vienna at the same time as Jean and Kurt, and they invited me to accompany them to the 18th district, their old stomping grounds where they first met. Sometimes you stop to reflect on all of the happy accidents and little choices that go into the magic of making a family. And it was there in that 18th district at that specific moment in time that Kurt had the wisdom to imagine a future with Jean, who had crossed his path only briefly in the larger scheme of time. He had to decide to act, and he did. I think that also involved equanimity somehow. I look around at the grandchildren, the sons, Felix, my husband, my daughter, Isabel, and I marvel at the magic web of accidents and circumstances that originated in that early moment in Kurt's life when he decided to act. I'm therefore very, very grateful to Kurt Tweraser, whom I respected and admired in so many ways. I think he was a master at life. He's, for me, much more than a father-in-law. He was really and truly is going to remain a role model for me.
At this point, I'd like to call up an honorary member of the Tweraser, Cohen, Holmes, Johnson, Scott family, Michele Batiste. You can describe how you came to know this family. She joins us today from Denver. And Michele, take it away.
I was the babysitter for Rafi and Gabe, and I spent a lot of time up at Lake Clear. And I first met Kurt 38 years ago. I was 14, and Kurt was very intimidating. he did a lot of mumbling and grumbling under his breath and a lot of proclaiming. And to a 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl, that was this big man. And I thought he was, and I didn't know the word back then, but I thought he was a bit of a curmudgeon. And he wasn't a good curmudgeon, and he wasn't a great curmudgeon. He was the best kind of curmudgeon. He was, I think, a curmudgeon by appearance, right? By reputation. It was, I think, a bit of a visage or an appearance that he projected and maintained. But even at 14, I knew it was a bit of a put on. And I could tell that what he really was someone who was just sort of continuously perplexed by the world. I think when Kurt appeared irked or exasperated, I really think he was just overcome by wonder. He often seemed just sort of on the edge of being amazed to me. I think the world and all its histories and stories and people never stopped being a source of astonishment for him. And when Kurt would tell his stories, it was never, with a moral or a lesson. Instead, it was more of an act of discovery. He would tell his stories, and as he would get to the close, I feel like his voice would go up an octave, and his eyes would get bigger, and his eyebrows would raise high on his forehead, and he would share that surprise or amazement or wonder. And I'm just so amazed at how Kurt kept himself open to bewilderment, because in that state of sort of bewilderment, he was always learning. He was untangling the knotted threads of humanity, and he never stopped, right? I heard he was writing his memoirs up until the end. Even about 5 years ago when I came and visited Kurt and Jeannie, he was working on a research project. He was still untangling puzzles. He was still marveling. Everything was just sort of marvel to him. And so I'm going to share one memory. And it was when I was a late teenager. I was maybe 18 or 19. And it was up at Balsam Bay. And I was beading. I brought some bead work. And I spent quiet times in the afternoons stringing little beads on very, very thin thread. And Kurt took an interest in this activity from afar. He would sort of look on skeptically, and then he just sort of looked on, paying attention. And then there was some curiosity. And as the days progressed, he would just sort of move physically closer and closer until one afternoon we were sitting at the table together, and he's watching. And I asked him if he wanted to try beading, and he said yes. And I gave him a thread with one end knotted, and he sorted through those tiny seed beads, the tiny little ones with these gigantic hands, and he patiently threaded them onto the string, one by one, and his brow was furrowed and his mouth was set, and he looked a lot like the curmudgeon I thought he was. But really, he was just immersed in the wonder of it. And he was just open to the befuddlement of these beads and this thread and this teenage girl who grew to love him as my first and best curmudgeon.
At this point, we would love to open it up to anybody who would like to share a brief remembrance of
Thank
of
you,
Kurt.
Felix. Thank you, Felix. I'm David Bardin. I was the best man, Kurt Tweraser's best man at that beautiful wedding so many years ago. And I am a cousin-in-law. Somebody invented that relationship to a lot of the people here today, as well as other people who couldn't be here today. I want to recall Kurt Tweraser as a source of good advice. Others have mentioned it. Maybe he wasn't followed always. There was a point in our lives, and I'm going to follow the 3-minute rule, so I'll be short here. There was a point in our lives where we both had heart issues. And my doctor had prescribed that I should walk at least half an hour a day. And I reported that to Kurt in a phone call. And Kurt very kindly said, no, that's not adequate. It should be at least an hour a day, with a great authority. And, it sounded like he knew what he was talking about, as he usually did. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, really, what's going on is very simple. My doctor knows that if he makes it an hour, I might not do it, whereas half an hour is so easy in those days. It wouldn't be easy today, but those days, and I would do it. So I explained all that to Kurt, and he said, well, maybe that was his reason, but that has nothing to do with ought to be your reason. And I think that was the point. And I tried on many occasions to follow that advice. So I want to say to the family, especially to Jeannie, but to Felix and Ben too, and that although Olivia has had to step out, she's been here most of the time. She's just not sitting next to me. And we all join in missing Kurt and your loss in missing Kurt. And I love you very much on this occasion.
Thank you. Anyone here? Thank you very much. Anyone here in the room who would like to share a short remembrance? Yes, we have to clear the room at 4. I'm sorry about that, but we will be reconvening in the lodge at 4:30, so memories can be shared there over wine, cold cuts, snacks, etc. If you feel more comfortable just standing up and talking, the microphone should pick it up. Dr. Evan Bukey, another distinguished historian, like to say a few words.
Well, those of you who know me know that I talk a lot. I first met Kurt when I came to member of the history department in 1969. We had a coffee room in what was then called the BA building. Kurt came over, sat down. He was rather overweight at the time. He asked what I had done for my dissertation, and I said Hanoverian separatism. But then I mentioned the fact that in 1961, I spent the summer in a town in southern Austria where everybody admired Hitler, were anti-Semitic, and thought the Anschluss era were the best years of those lives. That's when Kurt got very excited. And thereafter, we decided we would become colleagues in writing or researching the history of the city of Linz. So in 1975, we spent that summer. It's the only time I recall that we spoke only German. His parents were wonderful people. His mother was brilliant. If she had lived in an earlier or later years, she would have become a doctor. His father was retired, and they both hated the Nazis. His mother, because she said Hitler combed his hair on the wrong side, and his father, because who had experienced the monarchy, said they're all scoundrels, don't believe them. Anyway, we spent that summer, and it's the only time I can recall, it was the only one time that we spoke only German. And I can recall that he was always very funny, and but the only time in my life I saw him lose his temper, we were sitting in a bar and had probably too much to drink, and a man said he was a socialist. He said, and Kurt said, yeah. And he said, well, actually, a National Socialist. And Kurt got extremely angry. And he said, well, in my country, we don't use gas. We use electric chairs. It's the only time in my entire life that I saw Kurt lose his temper. Well, I could go on and say that thereafter, we published 2 books. One, My History of Linz, which in a sense was his as much as mine. He published a history of City Council of Linz. And thereafter, he translated a number of my articles into German. He read and critiqued everything that I wrote. And as recently as several years ago. So I don't know what else to say. It was my friend, and I shall miss him. Thank you.
Anyone else here in the room? Anita Bukey?
I am the smaller half of the one who just spoke. We knew Kurt and Jean in Vienna. And in honor of Kurt, we are both wearing our Austrian outfits. There were things that people have said which really hit home to me. One is cats. You go over to the Kennedys, you had dogs. You go to the Twerasers, you had cats. What do cats like? They like heat. They like warmth. And this is beginning to be a little thread here. Kurt would come over to our house and he would go to the fireplace, whether it was on or not, and just stand there, feeling the warmth of if there was heat or not. And the hot water bottle. I had forgotten about that. And when we were in Vienna one time, Evan and I and Jean and Kurt had gone to some kind of an operetta, I guess, and Kurt said it was cold. And we came out and we were about ready to hunt a streetcar or something to get home. And Kurt said, this is a direct quote from many years ago, I am having cold feet. And so I thought, this is wonderful, because that means we can take a taxi home. And so the hot water, all of this fits together. It all fits together.
I want to share an early memory. When Conrad, my husband, and Kurt were going up to Chicago for the American Political Science Association meeting in late August of 1971 or 72. Conrad would not drive because he knew what Chicago, he was from Chicago and knew what Chicago traffic was like. Kurt could not drive, so he sat in the back seat and mumbled. And I was the designated driver. So it was like 19 hours there and back, driving to the Palmer House in Chicago. We're driving through Illinois. I did not know Kurt. Remember, I did not know Kurt. We're driving through Illinois, and I heard these mumbles and grumbles from the back seat, and he says, "What is this?" And it was very loud. And looked down and said, "Oh, that's full of soybeans and corn." And snappy, he just replied, "It's flat."
Thank you very much.
It is flat.
Anybody else? Daniel?
What does it make in a sense?
I'm Daniel Levine, a neighbor of Kurt and Jean's for many years. We moved to Highland. We moved to Park Avenue, just a block from Highland, 1990. So we overlap with them a lot. And I'm the only one here who is going to say something about Kurt with a visual aid. Judith and I have two daughters, Amy and Sarah, who delighted in the invitations that Jean and Kurt would offer at Hanukkah time to come and play, to have latkes and to play the dreidel game with Kurt, with always a great twinkle in his eye. He delighted in twisting the dreidel in such a determined way, and mumbled with the results. But he always had this beatific smile when he would win, and he would take the peanuts and he would start to eat them even before the game was over. You know, you're supposed to count and see how many you had. And our daughters have that wonderful memory, and of course we, their parents, enjoy that memory, and we thank Jean and Kurt for enriching our lives through the dreidel game and Kurt's delight in it.
Even as teenagers.
Even as teenagers, yeah, they never outgrew it. They never outgrew it. So, thank you.
Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to share a remembrance?
Felix, I'd like to, if you don't mind. It's Robyn.
Okay, Ben's Robyn.
I was starting to. I didn't have anything planned because I just figured I'd be crying the whole time. But everybody else's speeches inspired me to share a couple of stories. So please excuse my tears. But Kurt was such a good father-in-law. As Shannon said, that I actually described him as jolly, which is probably not the first word that comes to mind, because he did have sort of that exterior that was a little intimidating, like Michele said. Could seem unapproachable at first, but man, he was just so much fun. And I feel like his spirit was jolly, because we talk about a twinkle in his eye. And he had those bright eyes, and I have to say, when Shannon was born, she has big eyes, and she would look out. And my dad, who passed a few years back, told me, he said, she's got the Tweraser stare. So we just always thought that was a funny thing. So I just wanted to share a couple of things that were mostly inspired by a couple of other stories, starting with Karen and Graham, when they had rented the place in Italy. Jean and Kurt had come to visit us in West Brookfield. After that visit, I don't know if it was before one of their trips to Lake Clear, but they had come to visit us, and we were visiting with my parents on their nice screen porch they had in the back of their house. And Kurt was sitting in his chair. He was very dignified, with his legs crossed, and he was holding a glass of wine. And I was asking him about the trip to Italy, and specifically about the food, because I know he liked food and he was a good cook. And at the time, he told me I couldn't say anything to Karen and Graham, but I have since let them know. I said, "So what did you think about food in Italy?" And he held the glass of wine and just went, "Huh, I prefer the Olive Garden." I literally thought my father was going to wet his pants. I don't think I'd seen him like that. A couple of other things. Isabel was talking about going to see him in hospice, and I remember going a year ago at Christmas with the kids. We were all thinking, this is the end of his life. He's probably not going to be around much longer. And then, he hung around for a good long time and was still very, very much himself. And on many Zoom calls, family Zoom calls, he would make jokes. And I think my favorite was, talking about hospice, and he would, with his big eyes, say, "I came here to die, but it's not working." And as far as being cold, like that, Ben had written his whole speech out, and he had that little note about sitting on the front lawn, and I made a little note like, "Oh, and you got to talk about how he was always cold." And I work for a company called Berkshire Blanket, and I was always bringing blankets to camp. And one of our favorite things that Berkshire Blanket makes is a heated mattress pad, because we live in New England and it's cold. So we keep the house cold, and we literally preheat our bed when we get into it in the winter. So I thought this would be perfect for Kurt in the Adirondacks. And you can keep it, you can just do one side so Kurt could have his warm side and Ian didn't have to put hers on. And so I asked him one night when he was filling his hot water bottle if he would like me to bring him one. And I think it was part of the fear of technology too, but he just looked at me and he closed up the hot water bottle and he goes, "Don't you realize I must be miserable?" Like, it would ruin his ability to complain. So I thought, okay. And lastly, I wanted to talk about, remind Isabel, you talked about him being in hospice and writing his memoirs. And I don't know why, if anyone found the answer, but he would specifically tell us, they are not memoirs, they are chronicles. So, does anyone out there know the difference between memoirs and chronicles? I would love to know what it is, but he was very adamant about making that distinction. In general, I just loved him so much. We had so many laughs, and I think, he knew, me being, quote, an outsider coming into the family, he was always very kind, and he just had an open heart, and he played with the kids, and again, he sort of had this gruff exterior, but I'm really like, I literally think the last words he said to me when we were leaving, right before he died, he grabbed my hand and he said, "I like you, you are fun." And I'll always remember that, and I feel the same way about him. So that's it.
A chronicle is a series of events set by time, whereas a memoir is organized in terms of the writer's subject matters, interests, and whatnot. So they are quite different.
Well,
quite
thank you for
different
the
products.
distinction.
And there's no question in my mind that if we had the privilege of Kurt Tweraser living longer than he did, that he would have produced additional valuable information, things, thoughts, organized, maybe written a memoir, but certainly chronicles. It's a loss to everybody.
Okay. So thank you, everybody, for coming today. Thank you, everybody who joined us via Zoom today. I invite you to stick around a little bit, maybe share a few stories about Kurt with each other. For those who can make it, and everybody is invited, of course, we will reconvene at 4:30 in the lodge, just across the street from the main house where we are here in Butterfield Trail. And we will be setting a few things up, the refreshments. I invite you to enjoy the amazing slideshow that Karen and Graham put together, which will be going through on a loop. Each image will display for about 7 seconds. And so that's time to maybe jog a memory about, oh yeah, that way I remember that particular time. So thank you all for coming. Thanks, Dad, for everything. And we'll see you in a little bit.